I have been really blessed and lucky that the role I'm in, we've, been really strategically invested in and stewarded. I have found that even if it's like not the most lucrative profession, I've always had more than I need. And I've like loved going to work every day, which I don't know how many of my peers can say that.
Welcome to the Job Dictionary podcast. Today, I will be interviewing Claire Raabe to learn a little bit more about what it's like to work as the Director of Business Honors at Texas A&M University. Claire, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited for our discussion.
I'm so excited for the job dictionary and to get to talk about something that I love.
Yeah, we're very excited as well. So we're going to go ahead and just get started. We always like to start off with three questions, and those are, in your own words, what do you do? Where do you live? And then as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
This is great. Okay, so in my own words, what I would say is that I get to hang out with college students for a living. If I had to pick out a one-liner, that's what it would be. There's a
Yeah.
lot more that goes into it. That's the one-liner. I live in College Station, Texas. It's a classic college town, home of Texas A&M University, one of
Right
the
on.
largest, if not the largest, public institution in the nation. And when I wanted to grow up, truly so ridiculous. Whenever I was like 3 or 4 and had no concept of the world, I was like, "I think I wanna be a priest, like a Catholic priest when I grew up," because in my view, I was like, "They only work an hour a week. This is a dream." Obviously, that's very different. It was not like a noble call, to serve the Lord. I also didn't quite understand that, like, I couldn't do that because, I wasn't a man. But, from there, I thought, like, marine biology, veterinarian, we all went through that, like, we went on a field trip
Mhm.
to SeaWorld phase. I don't actually like animals, so that's also ironic. Moving towards high school, I love sports, and so, I really thought that maybe I'd work in public relations for an athletics team or something like that. And then went off to business school and really felt a draw towards nonprofit. So that was the evolution over time.
Wow, that honestly, that's one of the funniest ones I've heard yet. I had not
Good.
heard priest.
Yeah.
That's too good. I think mine is worse though. I was telling Kelsey, our founder, that I wanted to be a dinosaur so bad from like 3 to 6. Like I was too old to be still saying that, but that was like my dream. So we were on the same, imagination path, if you
That's
will.
amazing. I love that.
So, going back to business, you went ahead and got into business. You found a love for nonprofit. What kind of made you get your start into where you're working now? Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, senior year of college, I studied accounting. I was in the business honors program, and basically, through a lot of different things, it came down to either an option to pursue a full time role in consulting or a full time role in nonprofit, specifically the Tim Tebow Foundation, which was cool because it was kind of at the intersection of my faith, sports,
Mhm,
and nonprofit. Uh,
mhm,
but whenever I was discerning those two options, I felt just like honestly a values conflict in the sense of I felt like there's a lot of congruency and alignment with the Tim Tebow Foundation role, but I would need
mhm,
to move to Florida on a nonprofit salary at a time when my little brother was going into 7th grade and I was going to be
mhm,
far from a lot of people. And I think I could have done that if I felt like there was a call there, but didn't quite have that piece. And then with consulting, I didn't feel the congruency and alignment in terms of feeling really connected to my work, which I don't think is necessary for everybody, but I
mhm.
kind of identify as a purpose diva, meaning I really struggle to do excellent work if I don't
Yeah.
see the meaning behind it. And I knew that about myself enough, but I also knew that, it was a great job that maximized opportunities and would keep me nearby family. And so I just
Mhm,
wrestled with that decision and ultimately
mhm.
came down to almost like your question of what did I want to be when I grew up. And but my question was more so like, what have I loved during college? Where have I felt like I've really come alive and thrived? And hokey as it was, my answer was business honors. I felt like there's a space there to grow in self-awareness and reflection, to learn, be curious, be surrounded by people who I loved. And it was a place where I just encountered impactful community. And I thought if I could be a part of that for my career, I would love it. And so I Googled what my program director had her master's degree in, had some GRE scores lying around, and applied for a higher ed master's program. And luckily, like the companies I was had offers from graciously extended, and I was able to interview for the master's program and just had a lot of peace going through that process, which
Mhm.
ultimately, when I got in, made me decide to pursue graduate school instead of those full-time offers. I did that full-time for a year, at which point a full-time job opened on the business honors team. And so I applied for that in
Wow.
2017, and I've worked for the program for the past 7 years.
Wow, that's incredible. So overall, you've been working in the field for 7 years.
Yes, yeah, total. So 7 years, as a I came in as a academic advisor, then a program coordinator, program manager, and then, really almost exactly a year ago now, so April of 2023, my previous boss, who was my program director, moved to faculty, moving towards retirement, and so I stepped into her role as director, and have been doing that for 1 year.
Wow, that's incredible. Congratulations.
Oh,
And you mentioned that you did study here at Texas A&M University. Is that correct?
I did,
Yeah.
yes.
What did you study when you were here?
So I did accounting and business honors. My
Mhm.
biggest regret is that I didn't do an English minor. I should have done that.
Oh no. What was your minor?
I didn't actually
Did you
do an
have one?
I should have.
No? Yeah.
I wish I had.
And I know that would have been awesome, but everything happens for a reason. Do you think that certain degrees or certifications are required to get this job?
Great question. In terms of going into higher education, I wouldn't say that a specific degree is required at the undergraduate level. I think that a lot of the people who I was in grad school with who um, ended up in the field came from all kinds of backgrounds. I mean,
Mhm,
STEM, liberal arts, business school.
mhm.
Definitely, I would say an emphasis more on like the psychology, sociology backgrounds typically.
Okay.
But really, the common theme was everybody in the room had, in some way, shape, or form, fallen in love with what people often coin as the other education at their institution. So, yes, they liked learning in the classroom, but it was a student org or res life or
Mhm.
some kind of program or place where they encountered profound community, and they wanted to be able to go work in that space. And so, um, at the undergraduate level, all kinds of degrees and credentials. Because
Got it.
higher education is higher education, it's a very
Mhm,
credential-based field, which
mhm.
is kind of a unique thing about it and something that's kind of hard because honestly, a lot of the entry-level jobs aren't very high paying, but they often require a master's degree to even not necessarily like, an advisor position probably won't, but to like move up in the field, get in leadership positions, graduate work is typically required. And so the most common route that people will go is getting a graduate degree, a master's degree in higher education. That can be a master's of science, it can be a master's of arts, it can even be a master's in education, an MED. And so those are the most common routes, I would say. What's nice is that most institutions have some kind of program. I say most, I guess I haven't totally researched this. A&M does, where if you start working for the university full time, you can get tuition assistance to help pay for those graduate programs.
Got
Or
it.
you
Alright.
can like get an assistantship and work for the institution while you're going to school. So while a graduate degree is required, typically there's programs and opportunities or work or tuition waivers to really offset the cost of the graduate degree while getting experience in a relevant field, which is nice.
That is nice. So you're saying there's kind of like all these different backgrounds and fields and different areas that you can go into if you want to go into higher education. So are there different types of, for example, your position is director of business honors. Are there different types of that, or is it typically just referred to I work in higher education?
It's such a hodgepodge. I mean, I think working in higher education is the catch-all because there's everything from people who work in housing as community directors, people who work in student activities or student life, who are advising student organizations and overseeing all the processes with that. Um, Student affairs is probably the catch-all phrase. I work in student affairs, My role is kind of unique because I work in the staff level. Most universities, like the two big buckets they're divided into is student affairs, which again, think of as like the other education, the non-classroom learning development programming that's
Mhm.
happening, and
Okay.
then academic affairs. And academic affairs is typically where all the colleges are. So I'm from the College of Liberal Arts, the College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Business.
Mhm.
But there's still student development roles that exist at the college level, academic advising, in my case, an academic program, business honors. And so traditionally, student affairs jobs lead to the student affairs side of the house. And my role is kind of unique because it is a staff role within the academic affairs side of the house, which ended up being a really good fit for me because that's
Yeah.
where the program was. But you can see roles across all of these avenues.
Awesome. So kind of even if you have like a special interest in a certain area, you can definitely get yourself in higher education within that umbrella that you're interested in.
100%. If you like loved your major as like if you're super passionate about healthcare but don't want to go to
Mhm.
medical school but want to impact future doctors, like going and working as a program coordinator for the School of Public Health could be a
Yeah.
really cool way to integrate a technical field but be doing work that aligns with your strengths and interests.
That's awesome. Now, Claire, talk to us a little bit about a day in your life. So what does it typically look like? I'm sure that they can vary depending on, which part of the semester that you're in, but from clock in to clock out, describe to us what a day looks like.
Totally. The day really, really varies, and it, depends on the semester, depends on the week. So, as a general rule, I'll roll into the office around 8. College students don't wake up early, so I typically have like an hour and a half to just like get through email, respond to what came through. They like to stay up late,
Mhm.
so I'll usually have a lot of emails in the morning that came through
Yeah,
really late. And
very
so
guilty of that.
yeah. A little bit of time in the morning to get settled, and then lots of meetings. Those meetings are sometimes, most often, with students, talking
Mhm.
about everything from career plans to their capstone projects to making decision about an employment offer. I don't do the advising as much anymore, but that was a big thing when I was in an advisor role, obviously. Um, from there, I now in my director role meet with my full-time staff consistently, as well as all kinds of committees, whether it be assessment or looking at curriculum decisions. I now teach a
Mhm.
class, which is really fun. So that
Oh,
takes up
wow.
some time in the fall semester, getting to teach. And um, yeah, just doing the operation. So, in addition to that, we do some selections and recruiting. So there's an event planning component, whether it be planning a recruiting event, or we do a lot of professional development events for our students. So bringing in speakers or hosting different things. So running the logistics on that. We have an admissions component to our program. So there's, a good chunk of time goes towards reviewing applications and selecting students. So, um, and then there's, just all the miscellaneous things that pop up, but those are probably the big buckets. And everybody can develop their own work style. It doesn't have to be one way. I think one thing that I love is that I'm a very distractible person. I'm not
Mhm.
focused in terms of strengths finders. Focus is like number 34 of my 34. And I constantly get interrupted, whether it be students just like swinging through to say, hey, or I have a quick question, or I need this, or my email's going off, or the phone is
Mhm.
ringing, or my team is popping in. Um, I feel like I jump from thing to thing to thing a lot in my job, which I really, really love. It's not the kind of job where I like shut my door and, sit with a problem for hours on end. I think that there are certain ways that if you are more of a focus fox, you could organize your work to be able to do that. But I
Mhm.
would say the office feels like very vivacious. There's very much something that's important to me is to have a sort of accessibility to the extent that I can to respond to the needs of the people and the students around me as they arise in the day to day.
Yeah. I love it. So kind of a lot of action going on, a lot of different, you never really know what you're going to go into on that day. You mentioned that you teach. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. Is that something that you recently started doing, or is it something that you started when you right away went into higher education?
Great question. It's new with the director role.
Mhm.
Universities are typically really um, picky, for lack of a better word, as they should be, about who's teaching classes and who has the credentials to do so. And so it's typically, like I said, that's a place where like the graduate degree becomes really important. You can't teach at the undergraduate level without having some kind of graduate coursework. So,
Got it.
if I didn't have my master's, that wouldn't even be a possibility. Um, and so there have been previous opportunities, and like there's a program at Texas A&M called Hello Blue U where
Mhm.
every incoming student is required to take a specific class, and they have instructor mentors for those classes that are typically advisors or other staff people who kind of serve as facilitators for those classroom experiences. So there's definitely ways to get some like teaching and facilitation experience without being the instructor of record on a 3-hour class, which is cool, just being in the
Got
learning
it.
environment. I would imagine most institutions have opportunities for that. But this
Mhm.
fall, or last fall, I should say, as the director, was the first year I was in the classroom with students teaching a 3-hour class.
That's awesome. And then do you feel kind of like a difference between in person, I'm teaching a class and I have these students versus working with the students kind of on a more one-on-one personal level?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is definitely different.
Mhm.
And it's also even different. I've spent a good amount of time like speaking to student organizations or speaking at conferences. And what I've found is that speaking to a group one time, delivering a compelling message, is very different than teaching a group where you're co-constructing knowledge and establishing a learning community and sustaining it over 15 weeks is very different than sitting down across the table from a student for a 30-minute appointment to ask them questions where you're hyper focused on
Mhm.
them. But I think that they're all intertwined and all interconnected. And so thinking about one, how are these distinct from one another, but also how can you use them to create what's the business term? Synergies, I guess, to think about like, okay, how can I take what I know and have observed about the student in the classroom and bring
Mhm.
it into this conversation where we're talking about what they might be interested in from a career standpoint. So I really like that, getting to see them from a bunch of different angles and impact them in different places.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of being able to connect it all into one. So even having these two different, jobs that you're doing and putting them into one, that's awesome. What tools or technologies do you use as part of your job?
Nothing overly thrilling. I would say, I mean, I spend a lot of time on Outlook. I love Outlook.
Mhm.
We use there's a platform that integrates with our calendars that is like an appointment setting up system that works pretty well. So I don't have to like block my availability. Students can go in and like my calendar synced if they want to set up time. We use like tons of Excel for a lot of our processes. We were running some VLOOKUPs the other day. Nothing like too intense from a data perspective, but there's definitely like some a data analysis that goes on just in terms of retention and student performance and whenever we're recruiting students. So a little bit of data, light. I'm like still kind of a chat GPT skeptic, but I'm trying to like get more used to it because I know I need to be able to teach students how to use it.
Yeah.
So use that in like the normal way that people do, very, very low bar on it. I write lots of emails. I saw something the other day that was like, you've read 1,000 emails this week. And I was
Oh
like,
my goodness.
what?
Wow. You're like, wow, it feels good to be recognized.
I know. Yeah, I'm like, thank you, Viva Insights. I'm like, did I read 1,000 or did I click on 1,000 and like delete half of them from like the
Yeah.
10 served? But hey, I'll take the credit.
Sure.
So I think that those are the main things. It's a very, and I think that this can vary. I think that higher education, it's not like it definitely has a reputation, and I think rightly so in some ways. It's like not always the most innovative space. It doesn't move super quickly. Um, but I think that part of it is also it's a high touch industry when it's at its best. And I think that when it's at its best, you're sitting across from a student, looking them in the eye, asking them questions. I will say some technologies helped, like Zoom, for example, like being able to meet with students virtually whenever they've left town. Um, and so there's definitely some like things that technology has enabled in a powerful way. But um, yeah, I wouldn't say it's an overly high tech field from my experience.
Yeah. And then speaking of whenever it's at its best and you feel like, this is exactly what I meant to do, what parts of your job are the most exciting or interesting or rewarding to you?
hmm Um, it's funny you asked this. So yesterday was graduation, which is always like a really big deal. And I think the thing that's most rewarding is, I specifically with the program that I work with, which this wouldn't be the case with all programs. I met these students whenever they were high school seniors, and I have gotten to watch them learn and grow over 4 years. And I've worked for the university, like I said, for 7, but there's only been 3 classes. This is the third class that I've known them from freshman year through senior year. And so
Wow.
to see the ways that they've learned and grown, to see them going out into the world and doing things that they care about and making an impact and just college students are so malleable. And I think I have to stop myself all the time and be like, Claire, they really listen to you. Like I need to be
Mm.
so, I don't want to say careful, but certainly thoughtful and consider the fact that, to these students, my words have some kind of weight for some reason, and to just steward that responsibility well, because they're so malleable, they're so hungry to be poured into, they are asking the biggest questions about life and who am I? Do I matter? What is my place in the world? And I've been given a platform to speak into that in some way. And that is like what I love the most. So that's super high level. It's not like every day I get to do X, Y, or Z thing, but that's what like gets me out of bed in the morning is that I get to do that and help them think about those things in a time whenever they are poised to do it and have the resources to do it.
I love that. And I'm sure as a college student yourself, you went through all of it. That must just make it kind of even more rewarding, kind of like seeing yourself and the students that you're pouring into. I'm sure that's something that you experience, and that's just awesome to see it come full circle.
Yeah, it's really special. I will say I turned 30 this year, and there's a moment where, especially, I mean, I was 23 when I started this job. And so I'd be advising and
Wow.
meeting students, and I was like, oh my gosh, I know so acutely what it feels like. And that I think really
Mhm.
helped me in the job because I was like, I can
I'm
access
sure.
those feelings and those emotions just like that. And now, being further removed from it, my perspective has changed and the students have changed, but I think the fundamental questions have not changed. I think that those things are still the same. And so it's been fun to adapt to the changing needs of the students and the ways that they're different from me, but also to still get to do the thing for them that I think they're looking for.
Yeah, I love it. And then what parts of the job are more on the more difficult side? So negative parts, anything that's emotionally challenging or draining, what is that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, anytime you're doing a job well, a relational job well, I think, two things come to mind. Two things that I try to keep in mind with my work and what I've learned about leadership is just to care and like care so much that it hurts sometimes, and that
Mhm.
whenever you really encounter people, like your heart is going to be broken sometimes. And so I think that has been a hard thing, whether it be like anything from just like watching students struggle and hurt and suffer either through like things they're experiencing personally or things happening in their lives to having to like give hard feedback, like clarity is kindness. And I've often thought, okay, like it's my responsibility to sometimes tell difficult things that I see as true to these students for their growth and development. And as a non-confrontational people pleaser, that has required a lot of, like conviction for me to be like, this is important. I need to have these developmental conversations, and figure out my style for doing that. I think that there's also been like deep tragedy, like I've had students like who have passed away, and that's just terrible and painful. And so I think that when invite people into your life in the way that I think doing this work well demands, there's going to be hurt and disappointment and pain. So that's kind of an existential version of it. So that's like the deepest, most emotional part, that it can be difficult, but it's also really rich. Then I think there's the more like work can just be toilsome sometimes. Like that's always going to be the case. So then I think there's a part where like higher education can be really, really slow moving. It can change a lot depending on the leadership. It can change a lot based on resources and the environment, and depending on the program you're working on, and what part of the university you're in, like resources can change a lot year to year. So it can be kind of unpredictable. Higher education can be kind of bureaucratic. So there's a lot of those pain points that come up. I have been really blessed and lucky that the role I'm in, we've, been really strategically invested in and stewarded. And so, but I know from peers that that can be something that's hard about higher education. And then I think lastly, this is maybe a combination of the first two. Something that can be hard about it is it's just really demanding August to May. Like this is the week I've been describing myself as like going into low power mode a little bit, like post graduation, because it has been a grind, and students oftentimes aren't available 8 to 5. And so, I've had a lot of like Sunday night meetings with my peer leaders, or PD events that go late into the evening, or, early morning coffees. And so I think that from a time perspective, it's all very, very rewarding, but it can be really demanding, um, time wise. And like I said, it doesn't have to be that. Like people, you can definitely set boundaries and make it
Right.
sustainable. But I think again, there's a certain amount of, I think, creating space for students and relationships, and growing with him, that just doesn't always fit 8 to 5, in my
Yeah.
opinion and in my experience. I think people can for sure do it well and have those boundaries, but um, I think that can be that's something that I've seen that I don't think is just specific to me, like a burnout, and like not always the highest pay, really, really like long hours, especially in the beginning few years whenever you're running programs and spending time with students outside of business hours.
Yeah. Since your job is so immersive and personable and lively, and it's not really like an office type job where you can just go and clock in, clock out, you're kind of always on the clock. Have you figured out ways to separate that difference? This is Claire, I'm working, and then this is Claire, I'm home. What does that work-life balance process look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, maybe this goes back to like the kind of person who I think thrives in this work. I One of my values is integrity, but what I mean by it isn't, I mean, yes, I'm a fan of like honesty and being upright, but my like personal values context, what I mean is having an integrated life. And so what I mean by that is like I love that my students are my students in my job, but I also see them at HEB, and I also will grab coffee in them, and sometimes I run into them at church. Like I am okay with there not being like a hard line of separation between work and personal life. And so I think what that means is, obviously when I'm like really, really exhausted, I have to like take time for myself. And I have a very rich community of friends here that have nothing to do with the university or students that give me a lot of energy. And so it's not like I'm just like, well, 100% of the time I'm thinking about students and work and job and yada yada, but I would say I'm not hyper, oh, what's the word? Like I'm comfortable with those lines being blurred a little bit,
Mhm.
in that like if a student reaches out about something after hours, or I'll be thinking about something related to work, and so I think that as long as like overall I can tell that like spiritually, emotionally, and physically I am well, I'm not
Mhm.
super concerned about cutting it off at 8 to 5. Um,
Right.
and but that's something that, like, I've had to figure out, and I sometimes have, like, gone way too far where I'm just, like, so exhausted, and have to, yeah, dial it back a little bit. I think probably the biggest thing I had to learn at the very beginning is, like, I would get emails in the evening, and I'd, like, feel like I needed to reply right away because I was
Mhm.
really trying to build rapport with
Right.
students and trust, and it took me a while to calibrate, like, okay, what is actually something that needs to be responded to immediately, and, like, what's something that can, like, wait 24 to 48 hours, and I grew more comfortable with that over time, um, and so, yeah, I think that that is my answer, um but I do think that, like, people can do different things, whatever their personal preference is in the job.
Yeah, that's a really fresh perspective because I feel like a lot of the time you hear a lot of people, especially like involved in a business or they're working anywhere in that field, that they feel like they have to separate their work and like personal life in order to feel full. But it's really nice to hear you say, like, I'm okay with having those lines blurred, and it is possible to still feel whole and myself while still working kind of 24/7. Just because you often hear, like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but it's nice to see that it works for some people. Maybe it's situational.
Yeah, totally, exactly.
Yeah. And then are you able to leave all your work at the office or do you ever take some home with you?
I definitely will take some home for me, mainly because, like I said, my, like, focus at the office is, like, nothing, and sometimes I do have focused work I need to do. Most commonly, what I find myself bringing home is grading, like, specifically grading writing. That's something that I, like, really have to be at home for, so, um yeah, that's probably the thing, like, every once in a while, I'll have a project or something that I'm like, "Okay, I just need to, like, do this not at the office and take it home," but the biggest thing that I'm doing, like, after hours are events, meetings, and grading.
Yeah. And then as, working as a director of business honors in higher education, do you have flexible hours where you can kind of work remotely or from home if you need to, or is it more common to work set hours in office?
I would say definitely the default is set hours in office, 8 to 5. A&M has a, like, great AWL policy, and the university is supportive of it, the college is supportive of it, so technically we're given a work from home day once a week. I, because of the nature of the work and everything I've said at this point, like, personally find it pretty hard to be gone. I mean, that's not the case during the summer, but, like, August to May, with the exception of winter break, it's really hard for me to be gone a full day from the office because, like, the student staff needs help on this, or, like, somebody has a question
Mhm.
here, or this student popped in, and I feel like I'm always there, and even still, people will be like, "I come by and you weren't there," and I'm like, "Where was I?" I feel like I'm always there. So, I think that it's one thing that's worked really well for me is I've had, like, Wednesday mornings blocked to work from home, and it's only, like, 2 or 3 hours, but 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the week to just, like, crank out a letter of rec, respond to emails, like, get some of that has worked really, really well for me. So, you can work from home. I definitely have coworkers who will spend a full day working from home and thrive and are really productive, but I think it really depends on the nature of the role and how student facing it is.
Right. And then kind of how, like you said, that you prefer working in that in-person setting because you just get more stuff done. You're working with students. It's kind of hard to do that when you're home. So I guess depending on the individual as well.
Yes, and I'm super extroverted, so that's the other thing that I, like being there. Whenever I'm home, I'm like, "What am I missing? What's going on that I'm not there for?" And
You're
other
like, where are
people are.
my students?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Are there any busy seasons in this job? Do you ever see a time in the academic year where it starts to pick up a little bit more or even slow down? Or is it pretty constant the whole year?
So August to May is just, like, wild, constantly wild, with the
The
exception of
whole
winter
the whole
break.
academic year.
Yeah, it's just like literally the whole time, it's crazy. Winter break is always, like, a really great reset. Summer is amazing. Summer, like, I have a whiteboard, and the whiteboard is only, like, things to think about in summer. I really, like, don't try to think big
Mm,
picture strategically and during the year. It's very difficult to. And so I love the rhythms of the breaks and the moments. And so summer's really wonderful for that. But during the semester, it is very like we are in execution mode. Probably the time, like the busiest time of the year. And this is so unique to our program. It's going to be different for everybody. But right after spring break, we come back. Registration happens 2 weeks later. So we're like,
mhm.
every student is like shocked whenever they come back from spring break and they're like, I have to register in 2 weeks. Like
Yeah,
August 2024 is so far away. And so they're like freaking out coming into the office. So advising is at its most intense. It's also our most intense recruiting season where we have 2 events. It's also the season where all of our seniors are wrapping up their capstone projects and we're like reviewing and giving feedback on that. So it's kind of like these four really big things all intersect right after spring break. So that was the
amazing.
time where I was like, I am absolutely losing my mind. But other than that, it's like very busy, I would say, with the exception of the breaks. But the breaks are really good reset times to
Yeah,
we work during them, we work full time, but to just like do projects, do some of that more deep work, strategic thinking.
right. And what do you think that people underestimate about this profession?
Oh, underestimate. I don't know. I think that honestly people just don't know about all the non-professor careers
Mhm.
that support higher education. I think people think higher ed and they picture like, yeah, a professor in a briefcase and tweed and a research role. And there's just a lot more in this space.
Yeah, there's a lot to dig into, especially more like administrative tasks. And like you said, like, your director and the way that you were able to find that was going through your schooling. And I'm sure that a lot of people, that aren't exposed to those opportunities may not even know that this is out there. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that you bring that up. And what do you think that people overestimate about this profession? So it could be something that's an overhyped idea, a very positive assumption, very negative assumption. Is there anything that you typically see people say and you're like, that's not necessarily true?
The great thing about higher education is it's everywhere, every
Mm,
like so many towns, big towns, small towns. I would say that like it's not like the most glamorous job all the time, like
yeah.
I think it's interesting because on one hand, like it's not a like investment banking, flying all over the country, high profile job. But on the other hand, it like is highly relational and it is very meaningful, but it's just not always the most glamorous, like living in a college town with a bunch of 18 to
Yeah.
22-year-olds. And it's definitely a choice to be immersed in the community and be in the campus. So I don't that's not really overhyped or underhyped, but I guess the other thing I would say is um I think I was, like, pretty nervous about the pay, which I think there's a question about that later,
Mm,
but I, um, I think that one thing I was surprised and this really varies from person to person, so I'm hesitant to even speak into it because it depends on, debt coming out of school and a million other factors, but I have found that at least in a place like College Station, college towns are pretty affordable, and so, I guess I would just say, like, every person's different on this, but I have found that even if it's like not the most lucrative profession, I've always had more than I need and I've like loved going to work every day, which I don't know how many of my peers can say that.
mhm. Yeah, exactly. All right. So moving on to our next question, what do you think is the fastest way to get into this profession, especially if someone has a more non-traditional background, so they're kind of looking into it, they don't really have any background or previous knowledge or experience. What do you think is the fastest or even most effective way to get into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think the fastest, most effective thing to do would be to find an advising position. I think it's highly relational, high impact immediately because students are like so grateful. That was the thing that always would crack me up is like I remember I wrote a letter of recommendation for a student, and this isn't normal, but I wrote a letter of recommendation and she like showed up with an edible arrangement. And I was like, This feels
Oh, that is
like
so sweet.
a disproportionate reaction to what I did, but, like, that would happen all the time, like, you'll fix somebody's schedule, and they'll be like, "Thank you so much, you saved my life," and I'm like,
Yeah,
"Not really, but you're welcome," and
but to
so
them, that impact is the same.
yeah, so I think that advising one, there's like always a shortage of advisors. We like need more great advisors who care about students, and it's a really good way to test the field and just get your leg in the door. And I think that if you're somebody who's student oriented, who's reliable, who's dedicated, who gets quality, accurate information out to students, people are going to want to hire people like that. And so getting your name in the door doing those things, I think opportunities will then begin to open up in front of you, within that context.
Mhm. Exactly. So we kind of touched on this earlier. You briefly mentioned it, but what other fields do you see people coming from when they begin working in higher education? So I know you said that it could really be anything that they're interested in. What are the typical ones that you see?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people go into this field, I think, directly from undergrad, like get on an academia track. But beyond that, I think, if I were ever to exit this career, and I think it goes vice versa, I think anybody who works in kind of like a people department, HR role, specifically like recruiting or programming, event planning, that kind of thing. Similarly, like career services space. There's tons of like career development happening at institutions. And so I see a lot of like corporate to college crossover in that regard. Um, High school guidance counseling, I think, is big, maybe even teaching anything, counseling, even. Like, I think just, yeah, there's a lot of like counseling skills that go into what we're doing. Anything that is relational developmental work, I think, is a very easy crossover.
Yeah, just that kind of definitely, there's that pipeline for sure. What does somebody have to be very good at or just overall really enjoy doing to be successful in a role like yours?
It's a great question. I think that they have to be really curious about people. Um, really, really curious about people. I don't think you have to be an extrovert at all. I think that like some of the people who are most dedicated, and are just like deeply invested in the individual across the table from them. And so I think that if you're a curious person who genuinely enjoys helping people, and helping people become the best version of themselves, whatever form that takes, there's a place for you in higher education. I like really, really love working with business honors and working with these like tryhards. And I can say that because I relate to them on that. But like they, get super overwhelmed and like burnt out and overcommit themselves. But I like really love working with this population, but there's so many different student populations on campus that need to have an adult who knows their name and is invested in their development. And so I really think it's like looking within yourself and saying like what's the field I want to work in? What's the student group that I feel like I can really relate to and impact, either based on my lived experiences or my passions, or some central value I care about, and creating that alignment there. And I think that'll be a like point of great contribution.
Yeah, I love it. And how long does that usually take for somebody to get good at it or even comfortable in the role? Or you can speak from personal experience as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard because it depends a lot. Like I said, there's so much that I think I knew going into my first job from having like just taken those classes, like gone through the core business classes and knew what professors were like and what the classes were like. Um, but I think that it probably took me like at least a year to feel good about the systems I was using and like the more technical aspects of the job.
Mhm.
And then it probably took me at least 3 years to feel like, okay, I have a good intuition for when this situation happens, what do I do? I have an email draft for this. I've seen this before. But those first 3 years were a lot of like standing in my supervisor's doorway and just being like, so I got this, and this is how I think I'm going to reply. This is what I think we should do. And had just really good top cover and a really wise leader to help me parse out a lot of those things. Um, and so, yeah, I think that that was really huge, but probably 1 to 3 years to really get comfortable with the rhythms of the school year and what students need and navigating the systems because you have to be technically competent or you're never going to have the opening to speak into the relational stuff, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Is there a promotion path when it comes to higher education? And if there is, what does it look like?
Yeah. Um, it really, really varies. Really, really varies. So of course within like teams and units, there's definitely moves to make. But because it's not corporate, it's not like there's headcount. It's not like they're hiring a certain number of senior managers every year. So it's also very
Mm,
dependent on who's in front of you. And, it can like totally change and totally vary based on that alone. Um, I would say that like, this depends is going to be different everywhere. In my experience, like they've been really good about like retaining people and making sure people feel valued and motivated. Um, but I think that the pathway can look really, really different, be really dependent on who's already in the organization. To reach the highest levels of administration, so thinking about like your associate deans and dean level and provost, all the like highest echelons of higher education, you really need a PhD. So that's something that
mm.
I see a lot of people around me is like it's not just a master's program, you need a PhD. And so I have a lot of coworkers right now who are working on PhDs as they work full time. Not something I'm doing currently. I just feel very sleepy whenever I think about the idea of doing a PhD. I'm like, that's too much. I don't think I want to do that. But I would say for like a traditional like climbing the ladder, if getting to the top of academia is the goal, a PhD is probably a necessity.
Right, that's the route. But that's all, like you said, you don't have to take it. There is a lot of other positions that you can work in doing kind of like a similar work and not necessarily having to acquire that PhD.
Totally.
All right. And then what is the average salary for somebody at your position? So I'm sure it can vary, depending on the state or the school that you're at. But if you could give us like a broad estimate, what would it be?
Yeah, that's great. So starting out, I would say, so like 7 years ago, I would say the average starting space for like a staff role, program coordinator, advisor would be anywhere from like 40 to 50, kind of in that range. I think with more tenure, at the like 5 to um the 4 to 6 year range, I would say you're probably sitting in like the 50 to 60s range. And then beyond that, like depending on the role, depending on the level of responsibility, I would say like 65 plus all the way to like there are people making six figures in this space, like in an administrative role, but it really depends on tenure and like I said, working like it's different sometimes working in the academic side of the house versus the student affairs side of the house. So that's been my observation. But one thing that's probably been more useful than me saying this is because Texas A&M, and this is true of all public institutions, there's all the salary data is published publicly online. So anybody who's curious about it can look up a job title in their state and see like what people make at the state institutions in those roles.
Awesome. When people in your field move on and they go into, different things, do you ever see a pattern or kind of something similar that they usually go into after working in higher education? Or is it there's not really a trend there?
I would say the same jobs. I haven't seen a trend, but I would say the same jobs that I see people coming in from would be the same jobs I see people exiting to. So like thinking about the counseling, teaching, the relational work, corporate recruiting people, that kind of space. Um, I honestly like most of the people I know who I've worked with, their exit has been retirement. I think that like a lot of people stay in this career for a long time.
Awesome. Are there any books or certifications, programs, anything that comes to your mind that you can think of that you would recommend to somebody wanting to get their start in higher education?
Yeah, I think books wise, one of my very favorites is a book called Excellent Sheep: The Miseducation of the American Elite by William Deresiewicz. I would say that if you read that book and are fired up by it, higher education could be a very, very good place for you to explore. I think Courage to Teach is a really good book. Anything by Parker Palmer is really strong. There's a lot of like inside higher ed podcasts. I think that if you enjoy reading about issues in higher education and think that like academia is an interesting space, like that's something worth paying attention to. But those are the ones I'd probably start with.
Yeah, love it. Those are great recommendations. So, kind of wrapping up our conversation today, we have one question that we like to ask our guests at the end of every interview. And that's if you had the chance to be able to look back at Claire when she was starting in this role 7 years ago, what would you go ahead and tell her now?
I think I would tell her that as long as you are laughing every day and learning from the people you're working with and the students across the table from you, you don't need to worry about anything else.
I love it. That is so sweet. Well, Claire, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all the insight that you shared and the advice that you gave us for anybody who has, any aspirations to work in higher education. I'm sure that they can all learn a lot from you because I know I did. So once again, thanks so much for coming on the Job Dictionary podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we could better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!